January 14th, 1944. Tierpitzufer, 72 to 76, Berlin. The headquarters of the Abwehr, German military intelligence, occupied a cluster of nondescript buildings along the Landwehr Canal, and on this particular morning, the mood inside was one of quiet, professional confidence. Reports from agents operating inside Britain had been arriving steadily for months. Some were transmitted by wireless, encrypted and retransmitted through Madrid to Berlin. Others arrived as lengthy letters, routed through Lisbon, filled with details about troop concentrations, equipment, stockpiles, and the movements of Allied divisions preparing for the invasion everyone knew was coming. The intelligence painted a clear picture. Massive Allied formations were gathering in southeastern England. An army group under the command of General George Patton, the most aggressive commander the Americans had, was assembling in Kent and Essex. The ports of Dover and Folkestone were filling with landing craft. The target was obvious. The Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing point of the English Channel, barely 20 miles of open water separating Britain from occupied France. The Abwehr's network in Britain, built over 4 years of careful recruitment and management, was delivering exactly what the German High Command needed to prepare its defences. The mathematics were clear. The invasion would come at the narrowest point. What German intelligence did not know, what Admiral Wilhelm Canaris himself may never have fully grasped despite running the entire operation, was that every single agent the Abwehr believed was working for Germany inside Britain was working for the British. Not most of them, not the majority. Every one. The entire German spy network in the United Kingdom had been identified, captured, turned, or fabricated from scratch by the British Security Service, MI5. The reports flowing into Tierpitzufer were not intelligence. They were fiction, carefully written by British handlers to tell the Germans exactly what the Allies wanted them to believe. And the greatest military deception in history was about to be built on the foundation of that total blindness. The story of how Germany's intelligence service was completely compromised begins not on the beaches of Normandy, but in the years before the war, when the Abwehr was considered one of the most formidable espionage organizations in Europe. Under Canaris, who took command on January 1st, 1935, the service had expanded from roughly 150 personnel to nearly 1,000 within 2 years. It had built networks across 6 key European capitals: Madrid, Lisbon, Bern, Ankara, Oslo, and Budapest, and maintained contacts with intelligence services in Estonia, Lithuania, Hungary, and Japan. Canaris himself was a veteran of covert operations, stretching back to the First World War, when he had served as a submarine commander and escaped internment in Chile through a series of exploits that read like adventure fiction. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant and elusive operator, the kind of man who could sit across a table from an adversary and give away nothing. British officers who interrogated German intelligence personnel after the war described him as someone who never agreed or disagreed, always found the position in between, and at the end of a conversation had revealed absolutely nothing. But brilliance in the man at the top could not compensate for catastrophic failures in the system beneath him, and the failures began almost immediately. The Abwehr's first major test against the Western Allies came before the war had even properly started. In 1939, the service dispatched a team of agents to the United States under Operation Pastorius, tasked with sabotaging American industrial plants. The agents were arrested, tried by military tribunal, and 6 of the 8 were executed in the electric chair. The operation was such an embarrassment that no further sabotage attempts were made against the American mainland for the rest of the war. It was a sign of things to come, a pattern of ambitious planning undermined by poor execution, inadequate training, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what it took to operate agents in hostile territory. The espionage campaign against Britain began in earnest following a conference in Kiel in July 1940, when the decision was made to infiltrate agents into the United Kingdom for intelligence gathering and sabotage. The agents arrived by various means. Some parachuted in, others came by submarine. Some entered on false passports or posing as refugees. The British public believed the country was riddled with well-trained German spies deeply integrated into society. Winston Churchill himself acknowledged the widespread spy mania. The reality was something entirely different. Between September and November of 1940, Fewer than 25 agents arrived in the country. Most were of non-German extraction. They were badly trained, poorly motivated, and shockingly easy to identify. The reasons for this were partly structural and partly technological. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park had broken the German Enigma encryption, which meant MI5 often knew about incoming agents before they even left the continent. The Radio Security Service operated wireless detection vans across the country, monitoring the airwaves for unauthorized transmissions. And when agents did arrive, they were often so poorly prepared that their covers disintegrated upon the first encounter with British authorities. The captured agents were taken to Camp 020, also known as Latchmere House in Richmond, where they were interrogated by Lieutenant Colonel Robin Stevens, a man described by his colleagues as brilliant and notorious in equal measure. Stevens picked apart their life histories, exposed their training, identified their handlers, and mapped the Abwehr's operational methods in detail. Once broken, the agents were offered a choice: cooperate and live, refuse and face the consequences. Most cooperated. Those who did were turned over to MI5's B1A section for management as double agents. Those who refused were either imprisoned or, in 13 cases over the course of the war, executed. One pair of agents illustrated just how amateurish the Abwehr's operations had become. A Dane named Wolf Schmidt and a Swede named Gösta Karoli parachuted into England in September 1940. They were genuine Nazis who had trained together and considered themselves friends. Karoli was coerced into turning double agent by being told his friend Schmidt's life depended on his cooperation. Schmidt was told that Karoli had betrayed him and switched sides out of anger. Neither story was true. Both were manipulations designed to exploit the only leverage MI5 had, the bonds between the men themselves. Karoli quickly became unmanageable. He attempted to strangle his MI5 handler, then escaped, strapping a canoe to a motorcycle with a vague plan to row across the English Channel to Holland. He fell off the motorcycle in front of a policeman and was recaptured. He was judged too dangerous to use and removed from the program. Schmidt, codenamed Tate by MI5, proved far more cooperative. He continued transmitting to Germany until May 1945. 5 years. 5 years of meticulously controlled disinformation flowing directly into Abwehr headquarters from a man the Germans believed was their most reliable agent in Britain. From the German perspective, the reports from Britain were reassuring. Their agents were productive. The intelligence was detailed, occasionally brilliant, and verifiable against other sources where verification was possible. What the Abwehr's analysts in Berlin and Hamburg never considered was that the other sources against which they verified agent reports were themselves compromised. When Agent Tate's wireless transmissions matched the details in Agent Garbo's letters, it was not because two independent sources had confirmed the same intelligence. It was because both messages had been written by British handlers working from the same approved script. The system fed on itself. Each compromised source reinforced the credibility of every other compromised source, creating an echo chamber so seamless that questioning one agent meant questioning them all, and questioning them all meant admitting that German intelligence in Britain had ceased to exist. The man who built this system into a weapon was Thomas Argyle Robertson, known as Tar from his initials, a charismatic MI5 officer and former Seaforth Highlander, who wore his regimental tartan trousers to work, earning the nickname Passion Pants. Robertson recognized early that turning German agents offered far more than simple counter-espionage. If you controlled the agents, you controlled what Germany believed. You could shape enemy expectations. You could create phantom armies, invent troop movements, and fabricate an entire strategic picture that existed nowhere except in the minds of German intelligence analysts reading the reports. In January 1941, Robertson and Oxford historian John Cecil Masterman established the 20 Committee to coordinate the disinformation being fed through the growing stable of double agents. The name was a deliberate joke. 20 in Roman numerals is written as 2 crossed lines, a double cross. The committee operated under a principle that was as simple as it was audacious. Every piece of information transmitted to Germany had to contain enough truth to maintain agent credibility, while embedding the specific falsehoods the Allies needed the Germans to believe. The double agents reported on genuine but carefully selected military details, troop movements that had already happened, equipment that was already known to the Germans through other channels, minor operational details that could be independently verified. Mixed into this stream of accurate trivia were the lies that mattered, fabricated order of battle information, invented divisions, false embarkation points, and gradually, as the war progressed and the need for a cross-channel invasion grew closer, the deception expanded from tactical misdirection into something unprecedented in the history of warfare. By 1941, Masterman would later write, MI5 actively ran and controlled the German espionage system in the United Kingdom. It was not an idle boast. Post-war examination of German records confirmed that not a single Abwehr agent operating in Britain went undetected, with the sole exception of one who committed suicide before he could be apprehended. The Abwehr was receiving intelligence from a network it believed was its own. Every report, every wireless transmission, every letter routed through neutral countries was authored, reviewed, and approved by British intelligence officers sitting in offices in London. The irony that hung over all of this was the man at the top. Wilhelm Canaris was not merely an incompetent spymaster presiding over a compromised network. He was something far more complicated and far more dangerous to the regime he served. In the early years, Canaris had been a true believer. When he took command of the Abwehr in 1935, he was, by several accounts, an enthusiastic supporter of Hitler and the Nazi program. A former Gestapo officer named Gerhard Fischer later testified that the relationship between the Führer and Canaris had converted the Admiral into an extreme exponent of Hitlerism. He oversaw deception operations during the annexation of Austria. He organized German intelligence support for Franco during the Spanish Civil War. He expanded the Abwehr into a formidable organization with contacts across 3 continents. He was promoted to Rear Admiral and then to Full Admiral. He was, in every respect, a man whose career and convictions were aligned with the regime. The break came in stages. The Blomberg-Fritsch scandal of early 1938, in which Hitler destroyed 2 senior military officers to consolidate his own power, shook Canaris deeply. Then came Kristallnacht in November of that year, the coordinated pogrom against Jewish shops, homes and synagogues across Germany that turned world opinion against the Reich overnight. The New York Times ran its headline the next morning, Nazis smash, loot and burn Jewish shops and temples. Canaris did not resign. He did something more consequential. He began using his authority to undermine the system from within. He appointed Hans Oster, a dedicated anti-Nazi, as his deputy, effectively placing a resistance operative at the nerve center of German military intelligence. He smuggled 500 Jews out of Nazi-occupied Holland in 1941, disguising them as Abwehr agents, and dispatching them to South America under official cover as infiltration agents. He met secretly with British intelligence contacts in Spain and with American intelligence chief William Donovan. He met with General Stuart Menzies, chief of British intelligence, in Santander. In March 1943, he personally flew to Smolensk to help plan an assassination attempt against Hitler with conspirators on the staff of Army Group Center. When he visited the front lines in Poland in 1939 and witnessed the massacre of 200 Jews at Bedzin by SS Einsatzgruppen, he protested directly to General Keitel. Keitel told him to take the matter no further. The world, Canaris told Keitel, would one day hold the Wehrmacht responsible for these methods, since they were taking place under its nose. Keitel did not disagree. He simply did not care. And through all of this, Canaris continued to run an intelligence service that was providing Germany with intelligence about Britain that was entirely fabricated by the British. The coincidence, if coincidence is what it was, proved more devastating to the German war effort than any single battle. The question that historians have debated ever since is whether Canaris knew his British network was compromised and simply allowed it to remain so. The evidence is circumstantial but suggestive, and it follows a pattern so consistent that coincidence strains credulity. The first failure came before the shooting war in the West even began. The Abwehr provided no useful intelligence before the 1940 campaign in France. German forces conquered the country in 6 weeks, but they did so despite their intelligence service, not because of it. The second failure was even more significant. Before Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, the Abwehr knew virtually nothing about the Red Army's order of battle. Canaris had obeyed Hitler's directive not to conduct intelligence operations that might annoy the Russians. It was a convenient excuse. A compliant spymaster would have found ways to gather information discreetly. Canaris appears to have used the directive as cover for providing nothing at all. The third failure came in November 1942. An Abwehr agent in Britain managed to identify French North Africa as the target of an imminent Allied landing and sent a full report to Hamburg. The report was accurate in every material respect. It was filed and dismissed. When Allied forces came ashore in Operation Torch, German and Italian forces were caught off guard across North Africa. The fourth failure was Sicily. In May 1943, the body of a dead man washed ashore on the Spanish coast, carrying what appeared to be top-secret Allied invasion plans. The documents, which were part of Operation Mincemeat, indicated that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. The Abwehr accepted the documents as genuine. German forces were repositioned accordingly. When the Allies invaded Sicily in July, the defenders were out of position. The fifth failure was Anzio. In January 1944, Canaris personally flew to the headquarters of Field Marshal Kesselring, commander of all German forces in the Mediterranean. Kesselring had heard rumours of an Allied landing somewhere on the Italian coast and wanted to know what Canaris knew. Canaris put everyone's mind at ease. There was no impending Allied landing. One of Kesselring's commanders asked whether Canaris knew the location of the British battleships. "We are looking after them," Canaris assured him. "Do not worry." At that very moment, approximately 250 Allied ships were approaching the coast. At dawn the following morning, 50,000 men of the American 3rd Division and the British 1st Division came ashore at Anzio in one of the largest amphibious operations of the war. 5 major intelligence failures in 4 years, each one at a moment when accurate intelligence could have fundamentally altered the course of the campaign, each one providing the Allies with the advantage of surprise at precisely the moment they needed it most. Whether through deliberate sabotage or a pattern of incompetence so extreme it achieved the same result, the Abwehr under Canaris had become Germany's greatest strategic liability, and the blindness was about to be exploited on a scale that would determine the outcome of the war in Europe. The architect of the deception that would make D-Day possible was not a general or an admiral, but a Spanish chicken farmer. Juan Pujol Garcia was born in Barcelona in 1912, the third of 4 children sent to boarding school run by the Marist brothers. He was a graduate of the Royal Poultry School in Spain, the country's most prestigious chicken farming academy, and his chicken farm in Barcelona had failed. He reluctantly served in the Spanish Civil War under Franco, developing in the process a deep hatred of both fascism and communism. In 1941, Pujol approached the British offering to spy for them. He was rejected. Undeterred, he went to the Germans and offered to spy for them, with the secret intention of becoming a double agent for the Allies. The Germans agreed, on the condition that he travel to Britain and send back a report. Pujol went to Lisbon instead, and from a library there, using a tourist guidebook, a Portuguese railway timetable, and a stack of British magazines, he began fabricating intelligence reports about a country he had never visited. The reports were imaginative, but riddled with errors that should have exposed them immediately. Pujol described military formations that did not exist, placed harbours in wrong cities, and demonstrated a grasp of British geography that would have embarrassed a schoolchild. He once claimed to have observed dockers in Glasgow willingly working for extra pay, apparently unaware that Glaswegian labourers were not known for their enthusiastic response to overtime requests. The Germans believed every word. They were so impressed that they expended considerable resources attempting to track down a convoy Pujol had invented entirely from his imagination. When MI5 finally realised that a freelance double agent was operating without their knowledge and creating chaos in their carefully managed deception system, they brought Pujol to London in April 1942 and gave him the codename Garbo, after Greta Garbo, for what they considered his extraordinary acting ability. His German handlers knew him as Alaric Arabelle. But Garbo was not the only double agent feeding the Abwehr's hunger for British intelligence. He was simply the most productive. Eddie Chapman, codenamed Zigzag, was a British professional criminal and safecracker, who had been imprisoned on the Channel Island of Guernsey when it was occupied by the German army. Recruited by the Abwehr, trained in codes and explosives, and parachuted back into England, Chapman immediately surrendered to MI5 and offered his services. His German case officers were so impressed with his reporting that he was awarded the Iron Cross, second class, making him perhaps the only British citizen decorated for services to Nazi Germany while actively working to destroy it. Duško Popov, codenamed Tricycle, was a Yugoslav lawyer who became so deeply embedded within the Abwehr that he developed personal relationships with senior German intelligence officers, allowing MI5 to map the organization from within. There was also Natalie Sergeyev, codenamed Treasure, a French woman of Russian origins who nearly destroyed the entire Fortitude deception in December 1943 when she went on strike because MI5 had allowed her beloved dog to die in quarantine in Gibraltar. She was eventually persuaded to continue, but the episode illustrated just how precarious the entire system was, held together by the volatile personalities of people who were, by definition, professional liars. By the end of the war, MI5 had run well over 50 double agents back to German intelligence. The sheer volume of controlled communication was staggering. Garbo's network alone generated nearly 5,000 pages of carefully constructed text over the course of the war, 315 letters averaging 2,000 words each, plus hundreds of wireless transmissions. What Pujol and his MI5 case officer Thomas Harris built over the next 2 years was one of the most elaborate fictions in espionage history. Garbo told the Germans he had recruited a network of 27 sub-agents spread across Britain, reporting on military preparations from Scotland to the south coast. Not one of these agents existed. Every report, every personality, every piece of intelligence was invented by Pujol and Harris, sitting in a London office, constructing an imaginary world so detailed and internally consistent that it withstood years of scrutiny by professional intelligence analysts. Garbo himself adopted the persona of a verbose, fanatical Nazi, ready to risk his life for the Führer's New World Order. His letters were deliberately florid, packed with ideological fervor and confusing bulk that kept his German handlers struggling to process the sheer volume of material. Harris, who was half Spanish and spoke the language fluently, helped craft the tone and ensure that the character remained consistent across thousands of pages of correspondence. The volume of material was so enormous that German intelligence in Spain became so flooded with information from Garbo's supposed network that they made no further attempt to infiltrate additional agents into Britain. Why would they? Their existing network was delivering everything they needed, or so they believed. Between January 1944 and D-Day, Garbo transmitted over 500 radio messages to Madrid, sometimes more than 20 in a single day. Madrid retransmitted them directly to Berlin. The reports from all corners of his fictitious network built a picture that the German High Command desperately wanted to believe. The main Allied invasion force, designated the 1st United States Army Group under Patton, was massing in southeastern England. The force comprised 11 divisions, roughly 150,000 men. Its target was the Pas-de-Calais. The physical deception matched the intelligence. In the fields of Kent and Essex, the Allies constructed an entire phantom military infrastructure visible from the air. 255 dummy landing craft were built in Folkestone Harbour, made from steel tubes lashed to buoyant drums and covered with canvas. Inflatable rubber Sherman tanks were deployed across the countryside, realistic enough from altitude to fool a photographic interpreter. Plywood trucks, fake ammunition dumps, and elaborate camp structures complete with laundry lines and vehicle tracks created the impression of a massive force preparing for embarkation. Soldiers drove rolling equipment behind the dummy tanks to create tire marks in the earth. Vans travelled across the region broadcasting fake radio traffic, simulating the communications pattern of an army group preparing for an amphibious assault. German reconnaissance aircraft flying over the region photographed exactly what the Allies wanted them to see, and every photograph confirmed what the agents on the ground were reporting. The system was seamless. Intelligence confirmed observation. Observation confirmed intelligence. And at the center of it all, coordinating the stream of disinformation flowing through every channel simultaneously, sat the 20 Committee, ensuring that every message, every fake tank, and every bogus radio transmission told the same story. The deception operation was codenamed Fortitude South, part of the broader Operation Bodyguard. Winston Churchill himself had called for a bodyguard of lies to protect the truth of the invasion at the Tehran Conference in November 1943. What he received was not merely a bodyguard, but an entire army of lies, staffed by double agents, maintained by mathematicians and novelists, and so thoroughly integrated into the German intelligence picture that by the spring of 1944, the lie had become the only truth the German High Command possessed about Allied intentions. On the night of June 5, 1944, arrangements had been made for Garbo to transmit a warning to Madrid about the imminent invasion. The timing was critical. The message had to arrive too late for the Germans to act on it, but early enough to protect Garbo's credibility as a source. At 3 a.m. on June 6, Garbo began transmitting. The German radio operators in Madrid did not answer. For 5 hours, the most important double agent in the history of espionage sat broadcasting into silence. When Madrid finally responded at 8 a.m, the landings had already begun. Garbo, in character, erupted with fury at their negligence. The rage was part of the performance, but it served a deeper purpose. Because the message had been delayed, Garbo could now add operational details that were already becoming apparent, reinforcing his reliability. He had warned them. They had failed to listen. His credibility soared. 4 days later came the critical moment. On June 9th, Garbo transmitted a message that would shape the course of the entire Normandy campaign. He reported that units from the 1st United States Army Group had not participated in the Normandy landings. The invasion currently underway was therefore a diversionary operation. The main assault, from Patton's Army Group, was still coming, and its target was the Pas de Calais. The Abwehr in Madrid summarized the report and sent it to Colonel Friedrich Adolf Krummacher, head of the intelligence branch at Wehrmacht Supreme Headquarters in Berlin. Krummacher wrote in red pen beneath the report that it confirmed the view already held that a further attack was to be expected in another place. He passed it to Colonel General Alfred Jodl, Chief of Operations, who passed it to Hitler. A German message to Madrid sent 2 days after D-Day praised the intelligence in terms that would have been almost comical had the stakes not been so enormous. All reports received in the last week from the Arabelle network, it stated, using Garbo's German codename, had been confirmed without exception and were to be described as especially valuable. The German intelligence apparatus was not merely failing to detect the deception, it was celebrating the quality of the deception being used against it. Every report that confirmed the Pas de Calais as the target was a report that had been carefully written to do precisely that. And Germany's intelligence professionals, trained to evaluate sources and detect fabrication, rated these fabrications as their most reliable intelligence product. On June 10th, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, commander of Wehrmacht Supreme Headquarters, telephoned Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West. The order to move the 1st Panzer Division and the Grossdeutschland Regiment to Normandy was cancelled. The divisions would remain at the Pas de Calais. The consequences were catastrophic, and they unfolded in layers over the weeks that followed. The first layer was the delay in releasing armoured reserves on D-Day itself. Hitler had gone to bed late on the night of June 5th, and his staff refused to wake him. The 4 panzer divisions held under his direct control near Paris could not move without his personal authorization. Hours slipped away. The 21st Panzer Division, the only armoured formation close enough to counterattack on the first day, reached the channel between Sword and Juno beaches before being forced to withdraw. It was the last time German armour came close to splitting the Allied beachhead. The second layer was the paralysis of the 15th Army. This was the formation that mattered most. It was Germany's strongest army in France, stationed precisely where the Allies needed it to stay, in the Pas de Calais, 200 miles from the Normandy fighting. Rommel begged for its divisions. He could see that Normandy was the real invasion, and that every hour of delay strengthened the Allied foothold. Von Rundstedt, his superior, refused to release them. The intelligence was clear. Patton's army group had not yet moved. The main attack was still coming. The Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the 1st SS Panzer Division, was held north of the Seine River and not ordered to Normandy until late June. Its vanguard did not arrive until the night of June 27th. The heart of the division reached the front in the first week of July, a full month after D-Day. The 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich, was ordered north from Toulouse in southern France, but was harassed the entire way by the French resistance, who sabotaged rail lines and ambushed columns, and by Allied fighter bombers that turned every daylight movement into a gauntlet. It did not reach Normandy until June 12th. The 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division arrived at Carentan on June 11th. Each division arrived piecemeal, exhausted, and too late to mount the kind of concentrated counterattack that might have driven the Allies back into the sea. Hitler himself wavered. On June 8th, he ordered 17 divisions released from Calais to Normandy. On June 9th, the same day Garbeau's critical report arrived, stating that Normandy was a feint, he cancelled the order. At a conference on June 17th, both von Rundstedt and Rommel told him directly that the invasion force could not be expelled and that German forces should withdraw to a more defensible position. Hitler ordered no withdrawals. German forces were to stand fast, fight to the last man, and counterattack vigorously. He promised reinforcements and new miracle weapons. Neither materialized in time. There were more German troops in the Pas de Calais at the end of June than there had been on D-Day. The third layer was psychological. The German command structure had been built to process intelligence and act on it with the speed and decisiveness that had conquered France in 6 weeks. That same command structure now processed intelligence that had been specifically designed to produce hesitation, division, and paralysis. Every confident assessment based on Abwehr reports made the next decision slower, because the confidence itself was the weapon being used against them. Rommel knew something was wrong. He could feel it in the pace of the battle, in the relentless Allied build-up that no diversion could sustain. But his instincts were overridden by reports that bore the official stamp of German military intelligence, reports that had been written in London. The irony compounded upon itself in layers that would have been absurd in fiction. On July 29, 1944, nearly 8 weeks after D-Day, Garbeau received a message from Germany informing him that he had been awarded the Iron Cross, second class, by the Führer himself for his extraordinary services to the German war effort. Pujol and Harris drafted a reply expressing Garbeau's humble thanks for an honor of which he was truly unworthy. A Spanish chicken farmer who had never set foot in Germany, running a network of 27 agents who had never existed, feeding intelligence. After the peace, Pujol relocated to Venezuela under an assumed name. He lived quietly for decades, his role unknown to the world. It was not until 1984 that British journalist and intelligence historian Nigel West tracked him down, living modestly in Caracas. Pujol returned to London for the 40th anniversary of D-Day and was quietly received at Buckingham Palace. He was the only individual in the war to have been decorated by both sides, the Iron Cross from Germany and a member of the Order of the British Empire from Britain, one for the lies he told and the other for telling them. The fall of the Abwehr and the triumph of the double-cross system was not a single failure, but a cascade of them, institutional, structural, and personal. The Abwehr's agents were poorly trained because the organization was stretched thin and competing with the SS intelligence apparatus for resources and prestige. Heinrich Himmler had built the Sicherheitsdienst into a rival intelligence empire, and the two services spent as much energy undermining each other as they did gathering intelligence on the enemy. The turf war consumed resources, divided attention, and created an atmosphere in which admitting that agents had been compromised meant handing ammunition to a bureaucratic rival. The agents who arrived in Britain were poorly motivated because many of them were coerced, reluctant, or actively hostile to the Nazi regime they were supposed to serve. The Abwehr recruited from the margins, men and women who could travel plausibly, but who often had no ideological commitment to the cause. When these agents landed in Britain and were offered a choice between cooperation and execution, the decision was not difficult. The intelligence they sent was never seriously questioned because the institutional culture of the Third Reich punished doubt and rewarded certainty. German handlers were too eager to please their superiors. They were too afraid of the consequences of admitting that an agent might have been turned. They were too invested in the narrative that their network was functioning effectively. Masterman himself observed after the war that Nazi handlers rarely, if ever, voiced suspicions about their agents because doing so would have invited scrutiny of their own competence. It was safer to file the report, endorse its accuracy, and pass it up the chain than to raise a question that might end a career. The atmosphere was one where the idea that an agent might have been compromised was not merely unwelcome but virtually unthinkable, because thinking it meant thinking about the possibility that the entire system had failed, and nobody in the hierarchy of the Third Reich survived by suggesting that systems had failed. Agents that had been fabricated by British officers in London had been personally decorated by Adolf Hitler for helping to destroy the German army in France. A post-war examination of German records found that during Operation Fortitude, no fewer than 62 of Garbo's reports were included in the intelligence summaries of the German Armed Forces High Command. These were not peripheral observations filed and forgotten. They were documents that shaped the strategic decisions of the Third Reich at the most critical moment of the war. The man who should have detected the deception was already gone. Canaris had been dismissed from command of the Abwehr on February 11, 1944, 4 months before D-Day. The official reasons were the accumulation of intelligence failures, the defection of an agent in Istanbul, and a sabotage operation against a British freighter in Cartagena that Hitler had explicitly prohibited. Heinrich Himmler, who had suspected Canaris for years, convinced Hitler to dissolve the Abwehr entirely and merge its functions into the Sicherheitsdienst, the SS intelligence service, under Walter Schellenberg. Canaris was placed under house arrest at Lauenstein Castle in the Frankenwald. By the time the greatest intelligence deception in history was executed, the head of the organization being deceived was sitting in a Bavarian castle, stripped of authority, waiting. After the July 20th bomb plot against Hitler, Himmler moved to arrest anyone connected to the resistance. Canaris had covered his tracks carefully throughout the war, but the conspirators around him had not been as cautious. Documents linking him to the resistance were discovered. He was arrested on July 23rd and held for months while evidence was assembled. On April 9, 1945, with Allied armies closing in from every direction, Wilhelm Canaris was hanged at Flossenbürg concentration camp. He was executed alongside Hans Oster, the deputy he had installed to protect the resistance, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the theologian and pastor he had helped smuggle to Sweden to make contact with the British. He was 58 years old. The war in Europe would end 29 days later. The full scale of what had happened remained secret for decades. Masterman wrote his internal report on the double-cross system in 1945, but it was classified until 1972. When it was finally published, it revealed what German intelligence had never known and what many historians had only suspected. MI5 had not merely penetrated the Abwehr's network in Britain, it had replaced it entirely. For nearly 5 years, from the fall of France in 1940 to the final German surrender in 1945, British intelligence had controlled every channel through which Germany received information about the United Kingdom, every agent report, every wireless transmission, every coded letter. All of it was authored by the enemy. The Abwehr had not merely failed to detect the deception, it had rewarded it. It had funded it, paying Garbo alone the equivalent of $340,000 American over the course of the war to maintain his fictitious network. It had built its entire strategic assessment of Allied intentions on a foundation that was designed, from the first brick to the last, by the people it was trying to spy on. As for Garbo himself, the man at the center of the greatest intelligence deception in history simply vanished. In September 1944, after a scare that his true identity might be exposed, MI5 staged his disappearance. He was officially dead, as far as the Germans knew, and his network continued operating without him for the remaining months of the war. And above it all sat Canaris, a man whose loyalty to Germany had long since separated from loyalty to its government, running an intelligence service that he may have been quietly dismantling from within while maintaining just enough competence to avoid detection. Whether he was a deliberate saboteur or simply an exhausted man presiding over an organization that was collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions remains one of the enduring mysteries of the war. What is certain is the result. When the Allies needed Germany to look at Calais, Germany looked at Calais. When they needed Germany to hold its reserves in place, Germany held them. When they needed Germany to believe that Normandy was a feint, Germany believed. The Abwehr entered the war as one of Europe's most feared intelligence organizations and ended it as perhaps the most thoroughly deceived. In between, a system built by a handful of British officers, an Oxford professor, a Scottish charmer in tartan trousers, and a Spanish chicken farmer rewrote the rules of modern intelligence warfare and demonstrated that the most dangerous weapon in any war is not the one your enemy carries, but the one he does not know you have placed in his hand. These stories cost something to live through. The least we can do is remember them. If this one meant something to you, subscribe so you do not miss the next. A like helps more people find these videos, and the comments here have become something special. Veterans' descendants sharing what their families never talked about. Be part of that. I will see you next time.